Yeah, so welcome back guys. So here in this lecture we'll try to perform a CRUD operation using REST. So for that, go to file, new Spring starter project. Here give a name as CRUD operation. Other things are same, and here we require Spring Web, then Spring Data JPA, then we will require MySQL and Lombok is optional. It's just instead of getters etc. we can use these things. So Spring Web, Spring Data JPA, MySQL, Lombok. Alright, so next and finish. So yeah, so here apart from this you should have a MySQL installed at your system. So this is a MySQL. Okay, right. So CRUD operation. So inside Java now we have to create multiple packages. So new package, let's give name it as controller package as usual. New package as a service package, then entity package, so entity service and repository. So this will be the package. So see, Spring is follows MVC pattern. So I will tell you. For example, let me explain you here in short. Okay, while it gets loaded, we'll try here our coding. So first of all we will create one entity. So entity class is a new Java class, and let's say the entity is employee entity this time. So finish. Right. So employee has first name, employee will have last name, employee will have email ID, and employee will have city. Okay, and employee will have ID. Right. So now in order to make this employee class as an entity, JPA entity, right, we have to make this employee class as a JPA entity. See what happens. If I will tell you blindly, you may not understand. That's why I am telling you here. So see, for example, this is our database. So to interact with the database or whatever the entities and all that things, that should be in DAO. So this is a DAO layer. It will interact with the database. this is our repository. This is our repository. So it will interact with the database, and this will be our service layer. This service layer will interact with the repository, and this will be our controller layer, final controller layer. It will interact with the service class, and here there will be a view, means our UI, user interface, right? So what we'll do, we will inject this repo inside the service, so that service can talk to the repo. We will inject this service inside the controller, as we have done earlier also. So this controller can use or access the methods of this service class. Service class can access the methods of this repo, and finally we can test this from the UI. Here in this case, until and unless the UI is not designed, we will use Postman, right? So this will be our framework, right? So great. So this is our employee entity. So to make this employee class as an entity, we should have an annotation that is @entity. So this is our employee entity. So this Java class is nothing but the JPA entity. Now this class represents a table. This class will represent a table. So add table, and for this table, name is equal to, let's say, what is the name of this table is employee. If you don't mention, then it will automatically take a table name as a class name. Okay, great. Now this long ID is a primary key, so this will use the annotation as ID, right? And for this ID we have another annotation, that is generated value. So generated value, so the argument is like strategy is equal to generation type dot identity. So what is this? See, ID we don't have to pass, we have to pass this first name from the UI, last name from the UI, email ID, but we don't have to pass the ID because ID is auto generated. So that's why we have to use this generated value. How this ID will be generated automatically? This is given by this annotation @generated value. Then this first name is column, right? Similarly, this last name, email ID and city, these are the columns, right? And then we have to generate a constructor, source, generate a constructor using fields. So don't take ID in this, okay? So generate constructor, because ID will be created automatically. And apart from this, generate source, and then generate getters and setters for all these fields. And then for JPA we will require a default constructor. We will require a default constructor also. So remove these things, remove these arguments. So this is our default constructor. Yeah, great. So this is our entity, employee entity. And one thing I forgot, that in this resources, in this application dot properties, we have to mention the database parameter, that is spring dot data source dot URL is equal to gdbc colon MySQL localhost. Now here we have to give a port number of your MySQL. In my case it's 3307, generally it's 3306. In my case it's 3307. So whatever your MySQL parameters, you just give as per that MySQL port number and all that things. So JDBC colon MySQL localhost 3307 slash database name. Let's say we will create one database, employee DB. Okay. Then similarly spring dot data source dot username is equal to root. Then spring dot data source dot password is equal to root. Whatever your password you have to mention over there. And spring dot data source dot driver class name is equal to com.mysql.cj.jdbc driver. Great. So these are the configuration parameters for the whole application that we have mentioned in this application.properties file. Okay. So now we have employee entity. Then we will create one repository inside this repo package. So new, this will be interface. This will be an interface. So employee repository. Now see, in a Spring we follow interface. Means Spring is a loosely coupled thing. So instead of creating a class and then passing a reference of that class, we are creating an interface. That's why interface can have multiple implementations. Tomorrow if implementation is changed, then we don't have to change the whole code, right? Because we don't have passed the class references. We have injected the interface reference. So injected can use any implementation, right? Depending upon our annotations or auto wiring. For that purpose we have a qualifier annotation also. So that's why we are creating interface. Yeah, so employee repository interface, and this will extend JPA repository. So this JPA repository, we have to pass these two arguments. First one is your entity name, that is or type employee, and second one is ID. What is the type of that ID? That is a long. So here we have to import this employee com.json.base.entity. Yeah, that's all. And here we don't have to, there is no need to use means add the repository annotation over here. Why? Because this employee repository extends this JPA repository, and if you go inside this, it uses @repository annotation itself. It has multiple implementations actually. So that's why there is no need to use repository annotation over here. Right. So we have written employee entity, we have a repository. Now we'll go to the service. So inside service we have to write a class employee service. So inside this service class, let me first, because I forgot, that's why I will use here service annotation. first of all. So inside this service, now we have to write the methods for the CRUD operation, like public. For example, if we pass an employee object, our REST endpoint or our service should be able to save that REST endpoint, save that employee object inside the database. So public employee save employee, it will take employee object as an argument, import this employee com.json.base.entity, and it will return. First of all, we have to inject this repository reference over here. So employee repository, as I have told you, we have repo. This repo we have to inject inside a service, right? So this is our service employee, this is our employee service, this is our repo. So we have to inject this repo inside this service. So employee repository employee, okay, import this employee repository com.json.base, and for this employee repository we will have one constructor, so that Spring will take care. Source and generate constructor using fields. So generate. So this will be our constructor. So now using this employees repository object, employee repository dot save entity. So entity is our employee. Okay, so this method will save. Whenever you will pass the employee object to this method, it will save this into the database. Similarly, if you want to get all the employees, right, then it will return a list of employees. It will return a list of employees. Get employees. So to get, or here we can say get all employees. So here there is no need to pass any argument, because we are, without passing any parameter, we are just getting a list of employees. So here it will simply return, using this employee repo object, find all. So find all. So it will return a list of employees, all employees. So now if we want a particular employee, by ID, then find by ID, and we have to pass long ID over here, and it will use again employee repo object and find by ID. Okay, now see, here we are finding employee by an ID, and it is returning list of employees. Still it is showing error. Why? Guess. Because if you will pass any ID, and what will happen if that, for that particular, if I am passing ID as a 2 or I am passing ID as a 10, and in my database if there are only 9 number of employees are there, there is no any employee with ID 10, then what will happen? It will return a null, and there will be a null pointer exception. So to avoid that null pointer exception, Java 8 has introduced optional class. So that's why the return type of this find by ID is not the list of employee, it is a optional of employee, right? So now there is no any error. So now if there is no any employee with this ID, it will not throw the null pointer exception because we have used optional. So there is a possibility that there will be no any employee for this particular ID. So that's why instead of list, here is optional. Great. Okay, then find by ID, save, get all employee. Here instead of get all employee, I will say find all employees. So find all employees, find by ID, then okay, then we'll delete the employee. So public void delete employee. So here also you have to pass long ID. So here delete by ID will say delete by ID. So employee repository, okay, yeah. So public void delete by ID. So here is employee repository dot delete by ID, and here we'll pass the ID. Great. So now we have written a service. Now we'll write controller class. So inside this controller, go to the file, new class, and employee controller. And now as I have told you, we have to inject this service into the controller, right? So this employee service we have to inject inside the controller. Employee service import employee service, write a constructor over here, source, generate constructor using fields, generate constructor. So the Spring Boot will take care of automatic or auto injection, dependency injection. Okay, and now public employee save employee. Here we have to pass the employee object, and here the employee service dot save employee, right? And it will return that employee. Import employee and make this endpoint. Similarly, we will write some other methods now. Public get public list of employee get all employees. So employee service start find all employees and return this list. And then public get employee by ID, long ID, and return employee service dot defined by ID and optional of type employee. Import this optional. And now delete public void delete employee by ID, pass the long ID over here, and employee service dot delete employee by ID. It will delete that. Correct. So now make this methods as a REST endpoint. So at the rate request mapping, I will just copy paste. So request mapping, okay. So request mapping, sorry, now here we are not using request mapping, here we have to use now. So this is the save employee. So here we will use at post mapping slash save. Here we will use get all employees. So at get mapping slash get all. Here we will use get, so get mapping and slash get by ID, and this is a delete mapping. So at delete mapping okay. Now here get mapping we have to pass the ID. So we have seen we can pass using a path variable also and query parameter. So here we'll use path variable and we'll pass here ID. Similarly here delete mapping, and here we will use path variable as an ID, same. And here now this employee body is the request, this is the request body, right? So here we have to use request body annotation, request body annotation. Here this long id is path variable, so we have to use add path variable annotation, and it will get the id. And here instead of path variable, what we will use is /delete, and here we will use query parameters. So request parameter, and here we have to give a key, and that key is an id. Okay, add request parameter. So here we are using a path variable, and here we are using a query parameter, right? And this is a request body. So all set, I think. And now we have to run this Spring Boot application. Employee so go to the base and CRUD. Let us first stop this. Right click, run as Spring Boot app. Okay. Okay, so there is some exception, unable to return JDBC metadata. Okay, so what is the exception? Let us see. Okay, so I think, see, inside this application.properties file we have mentioned as employee DB, but here is no any database with the name employee DB, right? So if you want, there are two options. You have to manually create a database, or let the Spring should take care of creating a database and table. So if you want the Spring to create database, the two more lines we have to add to the application.properties file. That two lines I will tell you. So that two lines we have to add in the Spring. Let me add that two lines. Spring.data source, Spring dot initialization mode you have to get always. Is equal to update. Great. So these two lines of code we have to add, so that Spring will take care of that things. Spring.dataSource.initialization mode is equal to always. Initialization mode should be always, and spring.jpa.hibernate.ddl auto is equal to update. Correct. So we'll run as a Spring Boot app, and this time it should run without any error, but still there are some exceptions. Let's check. Unknown database employee DB. Why it's not clear? Okay, let's create the database employee DB. Let's say, so here create database employee DB and execute, and here refresh all, and here you can see employee DB database has been created. And now go again to the Spring Boot app, run as Spring Boot app. Yeah, so our Spring Boot application has started, and the server is up and running, 8080 port number. So let's check the database once. So here in this employee DB, you can check the employee table has created. We have not created this employee table. This is created automatically by the Spring Boot. So now use employee DB and select star from employee DB. Sorry, select star from employee. Is there any spelling mistake? Acha. Here is some spelling mistake. I hope you observed that. Great. So employee. So this is our employee table inside employee DB database. ID, city, email ID, first name, last name. This is an empty database created by Spring Boot. Okay. So now we will use Postman, and from here we will try to post some things. Already I have some JSON here, and now okay, keep it as it is. So this is the first name, last name, email ID and city, and localhost 8080, employee, save. So see, here is a 200 request successful, server has responded. And if we'll check on the database, again we'll execute this query, and this time we have, for the first ID, we have this employee has been added. So again we will add some more. We'll try to add some more employees. Okay, and Pune. See. Then we will join. Great. So we have added some employees in the database, and let's check either they have added or not. Execute the query and see. So this much of employees has been added inside the database, and now so our post endpoint is working successfully, right? So now we have to check this. We have checked this post endpoint, save. Now we have to check this get all endpoint. So employee slash get all, this is the endpoint. So get data employee slash get all, send, and see. Here we can see all the employees: Simon, Michael, Jack, John, Jay, and Rama. Right. Now we have to check the employee with a particular ID. So for that there is get with particular ID. So we have to pass an ID as a path variable. So there is no any specific path here, just we have to pass the ID. So employee slash the ID which we want, right? So employee slash ID. So for the first, second ID, third ID, for the third ID there is a John, so we'll pass the third. So John should be C. So we are getting the employee with ID 3. If we will pass the ID 4, then we will get Michael. If we will pass the ID 5, then we will get the Simon. If we pass the ID 6, then there is a null. There is null, but we cannot see any null pointer exception here. Why? Because we have used the optional class. See, optional. That's why this is the beauty of optional class, which prevents the application to go inside the exception. Okay, so now, so we have tested this get employee by ID, and now the last thing remaining is delete employee by ID. Now we have to pass employee slash delete and the ID as a query parameter. Okay, so delete employee slash delete, and this is our query parameter. How to pass the query parameter? Question mark and key is the ID is equal to what ID you want to pass? 1. Send and see 200. So now if we will check the database, the first Rama should get deleted. This is the first Rama Jadhav. Execute it and see it got deleted. So all the endpoints are working successfully. So in the next lecture we will see how to update. We will try to write the update endpoint. Thank you.